This epic tofu scramble is cheesy, rich, and flavorful. Today I'm going to show how I make my epic tofu scramble, and along the way I'll give 5 tips for new vegans. I like to add potatoes to my scramble because they are nutritious and filling. I'm going to cut these into cubes, but you can make them any size you like. They will go into the oven because it's easier to cook them this way. I'm just adding some neutral oil and salt. I'm dicing an onion and a sweet bell pepper. They go into a hot pan with neutral oil, and I'll saute until the onions begin to soften. In the meantime, I'm going to quarter my mushrooms. The ingredients in this recipe are very adaptable. Don't like something? Leave it out. There are a multitude of other vegetables, tubers, and greens that can be added in place of anything that you don't like. Once the onions are softened, it's time to add the mushrooms. I just like to let them cook through for a couple of minutes. When the potatoes are finished, they go into the pan with the veggies. Which brings us to tip number 1. If you are trying to include a lot more fresh produce into your diet, we all know that it can be time-consuming to wash, chop, and cook. I always recommend cooking more of an ingredient than you need when possible. Yesterday, my husband roasted potatoes for part of our dinner, and he made a bunch more to add to another meal. Each component of a meal that does not have to be made from scratch saves time. It's time for the tofu. I like to use extra firm tofu, but firm would also work. This brings us to tip number 2. Freezing tofu prior to using changes the structure, creating a more dense tofu. Some would say a more meaty texture. This results in more firm, chewy pieces after cooking. And tip number 3 is that you don't have to press your tofu. I actually never ever press my tofu. Since it has been frozen, I'm able to squeeze it tightly by hand without the tofu breaking apart. I'm sure by using this method, I actually remove more water than I would by pressing. And the seasonings go in. I usually like to toast my seasonings, but in this recipe, I pour the seasonings directly on top of my tofu. Which brings us to tip number 4. Tofu is bland. It has 0 flavor, but it easily absorbs whichever flavors you add. So if you want tofu that is flavorful, add seasonings, marinade, or sauce. I'm mixing very well and will allow this to cook for about 5 more minutes to heat the tofu through. It's time to make the dish cheesy. I'm using Daya, whichever it's called, brand cheese, which brings us to tip number 5. When trying out vegan cheeses, get recommendations from people that you trust. Vegan cheese does not taste like dairy cheese. It just doesn't. But if you want to use a cheese that will melt properly, use Daya because it melts fantastically. It's my go-to cheese. I'm going to use the entire bag of cheese. Since this recipe is flexible, you could leave out the cheese if you choose, although this dish is heavenly with it in. I put most of the cheese in now and will save about 1/4 cup as a topping. I'm going to allow this to cook for about 2 minutes so the cheese can melt. Here's a great secret for making an epic tofu scramble. I'm going to add 2 heaping spoonfuls of this vegan sour cream and mix it through. The sour cream will add a more creamy factor to the scramble, making the dish even more epic. And the brand of the sour cream actually tastes a lot like dairy sour cream, but the first 2 ingredients are white beans and oats. I'm a big fan of real ingredients in any processed foods, and I highly recommend this specific product. The dish is finally done. I'm adding parsley here, although cilantro would also be fantastic. I'm adding some of my favorite toppings. Salsa, I like to use Mrs. Renfro's because the flavor is fantastic. Some of this delicious avocado, and another dollop of sour cream. Hey guys, we eat with our eyes first. Doesn't this look amazing? The result is creamy, oh so flavorful, and very filling. If you love amazing meals, check out my burrito bowl recipe. See you there.